Welcome back, everyone, to the Homeric Epic podcast. Oh boy, it's been a while. I apologize for the delay. I had one of those babies. Yeah, had a baby. It's been a wild ride. I've been experiencing the effects of sleep deprivation firsthand, including short-term memory loss. But that is not enough to stop me from recording this episode for you. Also, I've had 3 coffees today. Well, we have a pretty significant book to cover this episode, as Book 16 rounds out the second act of the story with the death of Patroclus. Yes, this era of Achilles' rage is coming to an end, and a whole new era of Manus will rise in its place. You might also be noticing that this episode is a little longer than others, and I chalk that up to Achilles and Hector always having the most interesting things to tell us. Whenever these two speak, there is always much to think about, and much has already been written on it as well. But before we begin, let me recap Book 15 so it is fresh in our minds. Zeus wakes up from an incredibly satisfying nap and immediately takes stock. Hector is injured, and the Achaeans have clawed back some of the momentum while he was out. He turns to Hera, recalling an old instance of her disobedience, but she denies any wrongdoing on her part here. Zeus, oddly chipper, just shrugs it off, and then lays out the rest of the plot for us very conveniently. Back on Olympus, Hera rejoins the other gods and stirs up Ares enough that he nearly bolts down to Troy himself. Meanwhile, Zeus dispatches Iris to shut down Poseidon's involvement on the Achaean side, and sends Apollo to get Hector back on his feet. Hector, now fully revived, leads the Trojans right back over the wall with renewed force. Seeing him upright again rattles the Achaeans badly. Nestor begs Zeus for a sign of protection, and he gets one, but the Trojans claim it as their own omen and push even harder. All that noise from the battlefield reaches Patroclus, still caring for Euphorbus, and it is the final push that gets him to move towards Achilles' tent. Back and forth the fighting goes, with Ajax and Teucer defending the ships from on deck, until Zeus, clearly favoring Hector, snaps Teucer's bowstring. The chaos keeps escalating until Ajax finally gets shoved back, and Hector manages to grab hold of one of the ships. Tension has been building and building and building, and now, in Book 16, it will be released somewhere. But before that happens, it's actually usually around now that I ask you to subscribe to the podcast. Ding! Now it's time. If you've enjoyed listening so far, please consider subscribing. Now for a recap of Book 16. It opens with Patroclus finally arriving at Achilles' tent. He immediately beseeches his friend in tears and asks him to defend the ships, or at least send him out in his armor to bring aid to the Achaeans. Achilles goes, "Why are you crying like a little girl, Patroclus?" and then hums and haws about it, but eventually does relent and says, "Sure, take my armor and go save the day." He gives some stern warnings not to go too far, though, and then the two get ready. Patroclus dons Achilles' armor, Achilles rallies the men, and then Patroclus sets forth. Achilles prays to Zeus that Patroclus may fight bravely and remain unharmed, and in a moment of pure tragic irony, Zeus says the first thing will happen, but not the second. So Patroclus sets off, and the Myrmidons are just wrecking everyone. It's a bloodbath. The tide of battle immediately reverses with the introduction of these fresh troops. Patroclus, in disguise, encounters Sarpedon and slays the great hero. Glaucus rallies Hector and the Trojans to rescue the corpse, but they are unsuccessful and have to retreat. Zeus wonders whether to slay Patroclus now, but decides to let him continue, and Patroclus pushes the Trojans back to the gates. Patroclus even leaps against the walls of Troy, but Apollo bats him away, until finally his time has come. Apollo removes Patroclus' armor, a guy named Euphorbus stabs him in the back, and then Hector runs him through. Hector boasts over Patroclus, but as he dies, Patroclus says that Hector's death is very near at the hands of Achilles. Hector doesn't believe him, and then leaves his corpse and runs off to get the horses of Achilles. And the book ends. I feel like I've said it before, but not much seems to happen in this book. But of course, there's still so much to touch on. So let me begin for real. The book picks up with Patroclus finally arriving at Achilles' tent. Recall that he set out from Nestor's tent in Book 11. And while this is still the same day in the Iliad, for us readers, it could be a while since we last heard from Patroclus. Importantly, though, Patroclus has been out of the Myrmidon compound. On his return, he helped staunch a fresh arrow wound in his friend Eurypylus' thigh. While he was able to save him, Patroclus saw the dire straits that the Achaeans find themselves in, and he brings this fresh exposure to the war with him in his meeting with Achilles. When Patroclus finally meets Achilles, he is streaming hot tears like a dark water spring which down sheer rock streams somber water. To Achilles' credit, he does pity the weeping Patroclus, but what he actually says to Patroclus sounds very strange, and it has vexed scholars for a long time. The comparison Achilles uses for the crying Patroclus is this, quote, "Why are you tearful, Patroclus, like a foolish girl who runs after her mother demanding to be picked up, grasping her dress and holds her back as she hurries, and looks at her weeping until she is picked up? Like her, Patroclus, you let your soft tear fall." End quote. Achilles goes on to ask if he has heard anything about their fathers, and says that if one of them has died, it would be cause to weep. He then asks if he weeps for the Argives who perish on account of their own arrogance. But I want to talk about this simile. It's a bit weird, isn't it? Why does Achilles portray his friend in this way? Here are some of the explanations that I have found most convincing. From one of my favorite sources, The Story of the Iliad by E.T. Owen, he emphasizes that the simile comes from a place of familiar friendship that Achilles and Patroclus share with one another. The tone is a bit mocking, but in a friendly way. Achilles is taking a jab at Patroclus' tearful appearance, but at the same time hints at the love shared between the two of them. The simile is not without irony, though on two different levels. The first being that Achilles mocks his companion, yet this is the last time they will ever speak together. Achilles will send out Patroclus and he will die the very same day. Second level of irony appears if we consider the scene in a different light. Remember, we are at war here, and we know that many of the Achaean captains have enslaved women. There's a strong argument to read the teary daughter simile as one of flight from impending enslavement. In our article, reinterpreting the Homeric simile of Iliad 16, 7-11, The Girl and Her Mother in Ancient Greek Warfare, Kathy L. Gassa argues that we have been reading the simile incorrectly. She argues that it is not a scene from domestic life meant to make us go, "Aww," but instead one all too common in the ancient world, the sack of a city and the enslavement of its women. Her evidence is that the Greek text actually says that the daughter is running with the mother, as in they are both running, and this is confirmed by Scholia on the passage. The voice of some of the verbs that describe their movements is often used for running animals in Homer, implying rapid movement. And finally, Kathy quotes from a different Greek author who describes the aftermath of Alexander the Great's defeat of Darius' army and the subsequent flight and chase of the woman who accompanied the army. I could go on, as this article is very convincing, but we don't have to look any further for evidence of this occurring than the Iliad itself, which repeats many times that the women and children are driven off into slavery upon the sack of a city, and Achilles and Patroclus have partaken of such acts themselves. This also makes Achilles' remark to Patroclus make sense narratively. Both the daughter and Patroclus are not crying without reason. They both fear for their lives. So while Achilles may be mocking Patroclus, he does so without full realization of the circumstances that his friend believes they are in. Thus, the teary daughter simile takes on a bit of a darker tone, but still reminds us of life outside warfare, as well as the costs of war, as many of the Homeric similes are wont to do. After his initial mocking greeting, Patroclus gives Achilles a current accounting of the situation, detailing the injured Achaean captains and renouncing Achilles' inhuman wrath, claiming his parents were not Thetis and Peleus, but the grey sea and wild cliffs. These two are chosen because they are the inanimate versions of Achilles' parents. His mother Thetis is a sea nymph, one of the 50 daughters of Nereus, and his father Peleus is the namesake of Mount Pelion in Greece, in the region that he hails from. Patroclus culminates his speech to Achilles by asking if there is some prophecy he has heard that prevents him from returning to battle, and, bar that, if he himself could lead the Myrmidons into battle wearing Achilles' armor. Now, Patroclus didn't come up with this idea. It's actually the idea Nestor gave to him in Book 11 after he visited the old man's tent. But Patroclus doesn't say this, and instead lets Achilles think it's an original idea. Why he doesn't say so is not clear, although if we think about it, would Achilles listen to anybody else's suggestion besides Patroclus? The answer we can see from the results here is no. Before Achilles replies, though, the poet with a heavy hand lets us know what is in store for Patroclus. Quote, "So he spoke beseeching, the great fool, for he was to beseech his own evil death and destruction." End quote. The poet has been heavier and heavier with the foreshadowing in recent books, and we are approaching the culmination of this foreshadowing. Achilles' reply to his friend thankfully recounts the plot for us, as it's been a while since he last spoke. I like to think that a bard performing this would know that some of his audience have forgotten the motivations of the characters, or just showed up late, and could use a refresher on the rage of Achilles up until this point. The other thing about Achilles' reply to Patroclus is that it artfully reveals his underlying emotional complexities. We can see him initially shocked by his friend's proposal with the, "What a thing you have said." Then he is reminded of his hurt and anger and recounts the wrong done to him by Agamemnon. Then he does say that it is not possible for him to be angered forever, which is exactly what you say when you're not angry anymore, right? He then changes again and restates what he said at the end of the embassy in reply to Ajax, that he would not fight until the fire reached his own ships. After this, he commands Patroclus to don his armor, and after this thought, he then demands that Patroclus not overextend his assault, lest he diminish the honor that should be afforded to Achilles. After, he finishes his speech off with a powerful image, quote, "Fathers Zeus and Athena and Apollo, would that none of the Trojans escape death, as many as they be, not one of the Argives, but we too emerge from the destruction, so that we alone strip the sacred veil from Ilion." End quote. The emotional journey that Achilles has gone through in this short span is shock, melancholy, acceptance, determination, concern, and exasperation. This is a man in turmoil. The circumstances demand so much from him, and he is torn. Should he save the ships himself? Should he send Patroclus? Should he do nothing? What will become of the gifts if he does act? What will become of the gifts if Patroclus is too successful? All of these questions boil in his mind. His final outburst, that he and Patroclus be the only ones remaining, is the expression of the desire of his soul to be free from this complication, and only he and his closest remain to receive the glory. I will discuss more at the end of the episode whether Achilles actually does relinquish his wrath here, or whether he just masks it. But for now, we must move on. The narrative diverges for a moment, and we witness a short encounter between Ajax, ship pike in hand, defending the ships against Hector. He's able to break Ajax's spearhead off, though, forcing the great wall of the Achaeans to retreat. The Trojans then torch the first ship, and it is Protesilaus' ship, and this is seen by Achilles. The fire has nearly reached Achilles' ships, but notice that it technically has not. Thus, Achilles' threat is not fulfilled, at least based on his perspective from Book 9. At this sight, he bids Patroclus to arm himself, and he musters the Myrmidons. We then read Patroclus' arming type scene, and there are a couple of things to point out. First, Patroclus arms himself in Achilles' armor, obviously, something Patroclus suggested, yet Nestor did not, with hopes that the Trojans will mistake him for Achilles and thus relent. Second, the mention of Achilles' spear is interesting in that Patroclus does not take it with him. The text reads, quote, "Only the spear of blameless Achilles he did not take up, heavy, massive, powerful. This no other of the Achaeans could wield, but only Achilles knew how to wield it. The spear of Pelion ash, which Chiron gave to his beloved father from the heights of Mount Pelion to be death to warriors." End quote. Now, it is a common trope within the folklore of the world for a warrior to have a signature weapon. Heracles has his club, Odysseus his bow, or Thor and his hammer, and so too does Achilles have his spear. Mount Pelion in Greece was known for its ash trees in antiquity, and the ash tree produces the best wood for spears, lightweight, flexible, and strong. Thus, the regional hero Achilles became associated with the effective spears from his area, and came to wield a spear himself. Anyways, Patroclus continues to arm himself, and Automedon, who is Achilles' charioteer, prepares the horses. The poet is preparing a great action, so we linger on the preparation for a bit, and we're told about Achilles' horses. Xanthos and Balius are immortal horses, literally the offspring of the west wind, Zephyrus, and a mare. Now, interesting tidbit, mares are known to keep their butts towards the blowing wind and away from their faces. So there's a theory that the motif of mares impregnated by the winds is inspired by this real horse behavior. It's also that the wind is fast and effortless, much like a powerful horse, so it really is a natural connection to make. The other horse, Pedasus, was taken after Achilles sacked the city of Eichon, which was Andromache's father's city. He also got his silver-bridged lyre from that city. Last thing on the horses, their names Xanthus, Balius, and Pedasus translate as the Dawn, Chestnut, and the Leaping One. And we know that this corresponds to their characteristics because there are other horses that share the same name and other description names such as Silverfoot, i.e., with 4 silver socks, a common coat characteristic. Homer sure does love his horses. Where were we? Yes. The build-up before Patroclus sets out to battle. Anticipating such a momentous event, the poet, of course, diverges for a simile. As they often do, the movement of a group is given a simile with a group of animals. And here the arming of the Myrmidons is compared to a pack of wolves who have killed a stag and then drink at a mountain stream. The simile has caused some confusion before. The wolves have already killed the stag and are lapping up water. How exactly does that relate to the Myrmidons who are about to set forth into battle? Well, as I mentioned before, a group must be described by a group in the simile. Also, wolves are not usually the top animal in Homeric similes. Usually they're scared off by lions or men. So the poet's choice of an animal of lower rank is interesting. They're shown as vicious, but not as vicious as Patroclus or Achilles, no doubt meant to increase their lord's stature. And despite their lower rank, the wolves are said to have boundless courage, so the poet does intentionally flatter the Myrmidons. Lastly, I think the fact that the wolves have already eaten and are now moving to find water is telling of the Myrmidons' situation. The soldiers have been well fed and rested, no doubt, having not fought in several weeks, but they are thirsty for battle and so move to quench their thirst. After the wolf simile, the poet moves into a sort of roll call of Achilles' forces, very similar to the catalogue of ships from Book 2. I won't go through them all in detail, but the descriptions of 2 Myrmidon captains can be read as comments of the backstory of Achilles. For example, one of his 5 commanders is his nephew, Menestios, born of the river god Sperchios and Achilles' sister, Polydora. In his backstory, there is a hint of potential sociological strife in the form of an unwed mother of a child. This also goes for the other captain, Eudoros, who is a son of Hermes. In both stories, the unwed mother retains her honor by marriage, and thus the son is integrated into society. Remember what Andromache said to Hector about fatherless children. They are not welcome at the feasts and suffer on the outskirts of society because they lack a father to protect them. These 2 characters' backstories serve to contrast Achilles' own family, where Thetis has left Peleus. The backstory of the captains and their intact families highlights this. Timothy P. Hoffmeister sums up the importance of this idea with respect to Achilles much better than I could. Quote, "The divorce of Achilles' parents is itself a kind of emblem. Thetis' abandonment of Peleus neatly conveys the failed union of irreconcilables that constitutes Achilles' nature." End quote. I'll link this paper in the notes. This goes to show that the poet is always using the material that is shown to us. It all serves an identifiable purpose. So much of Achilles' nature is the tension between 2 irreconcilable things, his mortality and his desire for immortality. And this goes down to his very family makeup. After the short catalogue of the Myrmidons, Achilles lashes the men into a fighting frenzy by recounting to them what they said while Achilles raged. This gives a glimpse into the general sentiment of his men over Achilles' withdrawal. They were not pleased about it. The men wanted to return home if they were not going to fight, and this shows us that even amongst the more common soldiers, not just the fellow kings, that Achilles' actions were against the grain. If they were not going to fight, then they should leave. In their eyes, his anger is not justified, much like what we heard from in the embassy in Book 9. Well, after the troops' fighting spirit is roused, Patroclus and Automedon set out to battle, and Achilles returns to his tent to beseech Father Zeus. It is apparent that this is a momentous occasion, both from how the poet has prepared the departure of Patroclus, the arming scene, the similes, the catalogue of Myrmidons, but also from this scene here, where Achilles prepares a libation to Zeus. He is said to take out a cup that was brought specifically for praying to Zeus and no other god. He purifies it, fills it with wine, and pours a libation to Zeus, who does see him, mind you. Achilles makes this prayer, quote, "Lord Zeus of Pelasgian Dodona, dwelling far away, ruler of Dodona of the bitter winter, around you dwell the Seloi, your interpreters, sleepers on the ground with unwashed feet. Surely once before this you heard me when I prayed. Honoring me, you smote hard the host of the Achaeans. Now, as once before, fulfill this wish for me. For I will remain amid my gathered ships, but I am sending my companion with the many Myrmidons to combat. Send glory forth with him, Zeus, far thunderer. Make brave the heart within his breast, so that even Hector comes to know whether my henchman on his own will prove skilled in fighting, or his hands range invincible only at that time when I myself go to join war's struggle. Then when he has driven the din of battle and the fighting from the ships, unharmed let him return to my swift ships, with all his armor and his close-fighting comrades. So he spoke in prayer, and Zeus all-devising heard him. And the Father granted one thing to him, but the other he refused him. That his companion would drive the war and fighting from the ships he granted him, but he refused his safe return from battle." End quote. Oh man, the dramatic irony here is so good. Achilles' prayer begins earnestly, reverently. We see that he recognizes the help he has received from Zeus up until this point. The Achaeans surely have been smote hard. Achilles asks that Zeus grant Patroclus glory and a brave heart in the fighting, that he may drive the fighting back from the ships. He then adds another wish, that Patroclus return unharmed from the fighting once this is accomplished. The tragic irony here is that Achilles is the one who sends forth his friend into the violence and wishes him to be unharmed. His inaction is what dooms Patroclus. Caught between his wrath and his pity for Patroclus and the other soldiers, he dooms him, yet cannot bear to see him harmed, and so makes this prayer to Zeus. We are told by the poet that Zeus will answer only one of his prayers. Well, Achilles stands outside of his shelter to watch the fighting, and we are told that the Myrmidons pour forth from the battle like wasps. The Greek for this passage contains a great consonance of pi, sigma, tau, which is p, s, t, which makes the simile simply buzz like the wasps it describes. This simile, like many others, is vague in who corresponds to what in the simile. Surely the Myrmidons are the wasps, but we are told that they are whipped up by children and cause trouble to the wayfaring man who passes by. Achilles could be seen as the boy, and they, the Trojans, the man who suffers the wasp's wrath, but just as easily could Achilles be both the boy and the man, as he suffers from provoking the wasps as well when Patroclus dies. On an even larger scale, the boy could be Paris, provoking the Achaean wasps by stealing Helen, making the Trojans suffer their stings. Because of the many possible levels of this simile, it seems to represent the way that all participants in combat are made into victims and victimizers. But now we are at last at the fighting. There's an interesting thing going on here narratively, because Patroclus has taken Achilles' armor and intends to pass himself off as Achilles in order to save the Achaeans. The Trojans flee in fear of Achilles and the destruction he is known to cause. But the narrative made it clear that Patroclus will die in this fight, so there is a point at which the Trojans realize that they are not actually fighting Achilles. I've always found it strange that there is not an explicit moment of revelation over the identity of Patroclus. It more falls by the wayside. Something to ponder, perhaps. In many of the reversals of the fighting, the counterattack is started with kills by the heroes of the currently dominating side. After Patroclus spears his man, the fire on the burnt ship of Patroclus is extinguished, and the other Achaean captains each claim a kill. The poet notes that 2 of these named victims are companions of Sarpedon, the son of Zeus. We heard from him before in Book 5 when he rebukes Hector, and in Book 12 when he tells Glaucus about the obligation that the nobility has. The poet has been carefully curating Sarpedon in our minds, and that is about to pay off here. The Trojans temporarily stand their ground, but after Ajax attacks Hector, there is a change in fortunes, and the Trojans begin to rout. Patroclus perceives their desperation and drives headlong towards where the confusion of the Trojans is greatest. The poet describes the battle as a thunderous tempest whipped up by Zeus over his anger at mankind for their crooked judgments and disregard for justice. This, of course, is to remind us of the guilt of Troy. The reason all of this is happening is because Troy must fall. And Patroclus seems on his way to accomplish this. After driving back Hector, he turns around and pens the Trojans against the ships. There's a rapid-fire succession of heroes that drop under Patroclus' spear, and this catches the eye of Sarpedon, as the poet lets us know that mostly Lycians who are dying. Sarpedon advances towards Patroclus and decries his Lycians for fleeing. He dismounts from his chariot, and the poet describes them as eagles screaming at one another as they rushed. The action then shifts to Zeus, who pities his son and says to Hera, quote, "Alas for me that Sarpedon, dearest of men to me, is destined to be broken by the hands of Patroclus, son of Menetius. My heart is inclined 2 ways in my breast as I debate this, whether snatching him alive from tearful battle, I should set him down in the rich country of Lycia, or now beat him down at the hands of Menetius' son." End quote. I mentioned briefly this scene in episode 9 on Book 8 in the context of Zeus weighing the fate of both armies before hurling lightning bolts at the Achaeans. The image is a powerful one, and in the scene it is implied that Zeus might control the fate of armies, but certainly is aware and also enacts that fate. This scene here in Book 16, however, goes further and suggests that Zeus can go against what is fated to happen. The reason he does not is articulated by Hera, quote, "Most dread son of Cronus, what kind of word have you spoken? This mortal man long ago consigned to his allotted fate. You wish to release him from the hard sorrow death? Do so, but not all the other gods will approve. And something else I will tell you, and you put it away in your mind. If you should send Sarpedon to his home alive, take care, lest some of the other gods should also wish to send his beloved son away from the ferocious combat." End quote. The reason Hera gives Zeus that he should not save his son is that the other gods will not approve and try to save their own children. They'd also be mad with Zeus over the children who have already died as well. The strife this would cause would be too great, and so it is not worth Zeus saving his son from his allotted fate, the fate which is that of all mortals. Pretty bleak. But Hera does continue. She says that if he feels pity for Sarpedon, then send Thanatos and Hypnos, the personifications of death and sleep, to retrieve the body and bring it home to Lycia for a proper burial. And this is indeed done. But before that happens, Sarpedon encounters Patroclus in the fighting. Sarpedon casts his spear and misses, but Patroclus' spear finds a home in Sarpedon's rib cage, and he topples like a mighty oak. Now, when prominent characters die in the Iliad, they are given a final chance to speak, and their words are considered extra impactful, if not prophetic. When Sarpedon goes down, he calls on his companion Glaucus to defend his body and to rally the Lycians to protect it, lest they strip the armor from it. Lastly, he says, "Hold on strongly and rally the people." And then he dies. Now, if it seems like this is a significant death, that's because it is. The character and death of Sarpedon have been carefully curated throughout the poem and are meant to prepare us for the greater character deaths that are coming, particularly Hector's. I'd like to highlight here the circumstances around Sarpedon's death. Sarpedon always fought bravely at the front and completely embodied the heroic ideal of the noblesse oblige that he spells out in Book 12. He has had some epic moments in the poem, including his duel with Heracles' son Tlepolemus, and being the first to breach the Achaean wall and partially tearing it down. Now his father Zeus is literally watching him go out to die, and he knows it. We feel this tragedy of a father who could save his son, but has to choose not to. and then we watch the death of the hero. Zeus allows the body to be retrieved, and this consolation comforts us over Sarpedon's death, that at least he may be mourned over properly. Sarpedon's death is Hector's death in miniature, an emotional primer. It prepares us for the themes that are to come. So remember this as we encounter the death of Hector, which forms the grandest part of the Iliad. Glaucus, the warrior who encountered Diomedes in Book 6 and lived, had just been injured by the arrow of Teucer, and so is unable to directly assist in the retrieval of his friend's body. He instead prays to Apollo to heal his wound, and Apollo obliges. Glaucus then upbraids the Trojan commanders for letting Sarpedon die in the fighting far from his homeland. Interestingly, here is where the Trojans and other warriors learned that it was Patroclus that killed Sarpedon, not Achilles. Note that when Sarpedon encountered Patroclus in disguise, he just said that he would find out who it was, not explicitly that it was Achilles. I don't know what to make of this ambiguity here, whether it serves a purpose or not, but I will say that now that Patroclus is named and everybody knows it's him, well, the glory is all his, right? And what did Achilles say to his friend before he set out? Ah, yes, it was, "You must not, without me, strive to battle the war-loving Trojans. You will render me less honored." And he adds that he should not lead on to Ilion. Unfortunately for Patroclus, this is exactly what he does, but he's first got to get there, so let me continue. The Trojans are grief-stricken at the news of Sarpedon's death and move to defend the body and the armor. Remember that the armor symbolizes the man, so protecting both from theft is critical. Glaucus rallies the Trojans and Patroclus rallies the Achaeans. The armies clash, and we are told that Zeus spread a deadly darkness on the ferocious combat, so that over his beloved son there would be deadly toil of fighting. In the re-engagement, the first soldier to be killed is a Myrmidon, and his backstory is telling. He had come to Peleus and Thetis as a suppliant because he had murdered his cousin in his own country. This is very similar to Patroclus' own backstory, so now the poet is foreshadowing extremely heavily about what is to come. The killing continues back and forth, Trojan to Achaean, spear thrown to spear caught. And we are shown an exchange between Aeneas and Meriones that feels a lot like others in the Iliad. But Patroclus interjects with something that reveals his character. After Meriones taunts Aeneas for missing, Patroclus says to him, quote, "Meriones, why do you, a good warrior, utter these things? Old friend, it is not by abusive words the Trojans will give way from the corpse. The earth will bury many a man before that. For the sum of war lies in strength of hands, the sum of words in counsel. Therefore there is no need to put up words, but to do battle." End quote. For how important Patroclus is to Achilles and to the story at large, we don't actually hear from him very much. But the poet works with the resources he has and so does not waste a moment of Patroclus' time in characterizing him. Achilles himself is not a huge fan of words or counsels, as they have not really gone his way before. Patroclus seems to share this sentiment, favoring action when it is appropriate. It is the mark of a good Homeric warrior to know which one the situation calls for, and this Patroclus and Achilles have in common. The fighting continues to a point in which the body of Sarpedon is no longer recognizable among the blood and dust and missiles. Zeus broods over whether to have Hector slay Patroclus now or after further fighting, and decides on the latter. To accomplish this, Zeus is said to inspire a coward's spirit in Hector, causing him to flee. This line has caused some controversy throughout the millennia of Homeric scholarship. Some say it is uncharacteristic of Hector to flee here, and that the poet needed a reason for him to give ground to Patroclus, and so he just has Zeus make him flee. Others say that Hector is prone to bouts of cowardice, as we shall see in his fight with Achilles. While I am a big Hector fan, I do think this is in line with his character. He has a very complicated relationship with bravery, and this is one of his very real, very human flaws. The text also says he can see how the scales of Zeus were balanced, so perhaps he could sense the change in the tide of battle. Regardless, the retreat allows the Achaeans to strip the armor of Sarpedon and take his horses. At this, Zeus sends Apollo to conduct Thanatos and Hypnos, the brothers' death and sleep, to convey the body of Sarpedon back to his home in Lycia for proper funeral rites. It is significant that Zeus, the king of gods, ensures this for his son. It highlights the importance of a proper burial in the minds of the audiences of the time, and in terms of the story, sets the precedent for what should happen to a slain warrior of great honor. As Patroclus routs the Trojans, the poet, in his own voice, reminds us of the folly he is committing by going against the injunction of Achilles. Do not approach Troy. It is quite clear that this will lead to his death. To mark the occasion, the poet apostrophizes Patroclus with a "Who was the first, who was the last you slew, Patroclus, when the gods summon you deathward?" Patroclus is one of only 3 characters in the Iliad whom the poet addresses directly, the others being Menelaus and the unlucky Melanippus. The poet then says that the Achaeans would have taken Troy were it not for Apollo taking a stand on the walls in defense. What happens next is one of my favorite moments in the whole Iliad, quote, "Then would the sons of the Achaeans have taken high-gated Troy under the hands of Patroclus as he raged ever forward with his spear, had not Phoebus Apollo on the strong-built tower taken his stand with deadly deeds in mind for him, but help for the Trojans. 3 times to the angled joint of the high wall went Patroclus, and 3 times Apollo smote him back, batting with immortal hands the shining shield. But when for the 4th time Patroclus charged like something more than human, the god, calling out in a voice of dread, spoke winged words. 'Give way, Patroclus, seed of Zeus. It is not fated that the city of the noble Trojans be sacked under your spear, nor under that of Achilles, he who is greater by far than you.' So he spoke, and Patroclus withdrew a great way back, shunning the wrath of far-shooting Apollo." End quote. Oh man, simply cinematic. You'll recall a similar scene when Diomedes was hunting Aeneas and Apollo defended him. The 3 times X and 3 times Y formula will just go so hard. As before with Diomedes, this scene highlights a breach in the divine order by Patroclus, as he tries to contend with a god on terms that the gods do not tolerate. It is said explicitly that Patroclus shunned the wrath, and the Greek word is menon, the same wrath that indicates a breach in the divine order, and the wrath that Achilles holds against Agamemnon. Besides the implications of this, let me just gush here for a moment and highlight how freaking cool this scene is. Patroclus is leaping up the wall, and Apollo, unarmed, is battering him away so easily, yet Patroclus keeps at it until he crosses the divine line. This scene would just absolutely make it into my prestige multi-part Iliad television series. I love it so much. Anyways, the onslaught of Patroclus causes Apollo to rally Hector, who chooses a new charioteer, Cebriones, his half-brother. The last 2 of Hector's charioteers got killed rather immediately, but luckily, young Cebriones actually survives. I'm just kidding. It seems like a sick joke from Homer, but Patroclus immediately cracks Cebriones in the dome with a rock. Interestingly, at this kill, Patroclus begins to taunt his dead opponent, calling him a nimble diver for mollusks, the way he tumbles out of the chariot. This is quite telling, as just a couple pages before, Patroclus had told Meriones that such boasts were not fit for war, and that words should be kept for counsel. So what gives? Well, it looks like Patroclus is giving way to the hubris of success in battle. He's nearly stormed Troy and killed scores of people since the conversation with Meriones earlier in the book, including fighting against a god, and now he seems to think himself above such things as hubris. Well, now the body of Cebriones becomes the locus of the fighting, with Patroclus and Hector struggling over the corpse. The deaths of important named characters in the book and the bloody struggles over their bodies prefigures the colossal struggle over the body of Patroclus that will dominate the next book. Remember, Homer is always providing examples of things so that later on he can outdo and exceed the things he has already shown us. Again, though, the Achaeans are able to capture the corpse, and now Patroclus' Aristeia reaches a pitch. It is often debated in the Iliad which individual kills the most warriors, and depending on what you count as a kill, it is one of 3 heroes. Hector with the most named kills, followed by Patroclus, and then Achilles. But that is specifically named kills, and in the next paragraph the poet does something unique. He just numbers those slain by Patroclus. He says, 3 times then he charged at them, swift Ares equal, shouting his terrifying cry, and 3 times he slew 9 men. This would total 27 unnamed kills and put Patroclus far in the lead. The situation becomes further muddled by Achilles, though, whose terrifyingly mighty yawp from the wall causes numerous Trojan charioteers to crash and die. Now, regardless of who kills the most, this great moment marks the end of Patroclus. Apollo the Dread now maneuvers through the fighting, shrouded in thick mist, and coming up behind unsuspecting Patroclus, just absolutely smacks him. The impact is so hard that his eyes spin, his helmet is knocked from him, his spear shatters, and he is stripped of his armor. The poet dwells on the image of the helmet rolling through the dust, highlighting that before this it was forbidden that it be defiled such, since it protected the head of Achilles. But now it will be given to Hector to wear, although his death was near. Spooky. Now, seeing as armor is symbolically the life of the warrior, Patroclus' fate is sealed. Immediately, he is speared in the back by a rather unknown warrior, Euphorbus, son of Panthos. There will be much to say on this Euphorbus character at the end of the episode, but for now, let me continue with our current spot in the narrative. This spear did not kill Patroclus, which is remarkable in itself, as normally spear wounds to the torso are immediately fatal in the Iliad. But the combination of schmack from Apollo and spear to the back causes Patroclus to try and retreat. This is spied by Hector, who sallies forth and runs him through with his spear, finishing the job. Hector now vaunts over the slain Patroclus and says, quote, "Patroclus, surely you thought you would cut down our city and, stripping the Trojan women of their day of freedom, would carry them in ships to your beloved fatherland. You fool, for in front of them the swift horses of Hector galloped with outstretched legs to battle, and I with my spear myself outshone the battle-loving Trojans, I who warded off from them the day of slavery. You the vultures will devour here. Poor wretch, nor great though he is, did Achilles rescue you, who I suppose laid many injunctions on you while he remained and you departed. Do not return to me, Patroclus, matcher of horses, by the hollow ships, before you have ripped manslaying Hector's bloodied tunic around his breast. Thus I suppose he spoke to you and persuaded your fool's wits." End quote. Oh, Hector, you confident fool, I can't help but love you. What we see in this speech here is Hector's perspective of events. He proclaims he is the defender of Troy and warded off their day of slavery, yet just earlier had to be roused by Glaucus to rescue Sarpedon's corpse. He says he outshone the battle-loving Trojans, yet fled battle twice in this book already. To me, this temporary victory over Patroclus has inspired Hector with hope. Hope that he actually has warded off the day of slavery from the Trojan women, saving his family, and done so in the warrior mode of slaying the enemy. High off this, Hector now boasts over Patroclus in a not-so-true manner. But what is really interesting to me is what Hector thinks Achilles said to Patroclus. In Hector's mind, Achilles is a harsh taskmaster who has forced Patroclus to fight and told not to return till he has killed Hector in particular. This shows that Hector considers himself the most important target in the Trojan army. It also shows that Hector does not characterize the Achaeans with the same emotions that he does the Trojans. Remember that the reason Patroclus was sent out was because he feared for the fate of the Achaeans. It is out of desire to save them that Patroclus started fighting, although this is not why he continues to fight after he has defended the ships. And it was not without reservation or hesitation that Achilles sent out Patroclus. And in fact, Achilles told Patroclus the exact opposite thing that Hector thinks he did, to not lead on to Troy in the fighting. No mention of Hector by Achilles, contrary to what Hector thinks here. A classic case of, they're obsessed with me, and I don't think about you at all. This is just incredible psychological characterization on the part of the poet, and accomplished in such a casual, natural, and succinct way. To me, scenes like this are just straight out of movies or series, one that I could only dream to make. It speaks to the present, fully realized, and visual nature of epic poetry that we can picture such a scene taking place in our modern visual medium. Anyways, now Patroclus utters his final words. Quote, "Make your great boast now, Hector, for Zeus the son of Cronus has given you victory, and Apollo, they who easily broke me. For they took the armor from my shoulders, but if 20 such as you had encountered me, all would have died here broken beneath my spear, Deadly Fate and the son of Leto killed me, and of men it was Euphorbus. You were third to kill me. And something else I will tell you, and you put it away in your mind. You yourself will not live long, but already death and powerful fate stand close beside you, to be broken at the hands of blameless Achilles Eacides. End quote. Patroclus says, "Boast while you can. You are only the third to slay me, Hector." The Greek word he uses is even softer, meaning Hector more despoiled him instead of actually slaying him. This severely undercuts Hector's victory, and in fact makes it so that when Hector does don the armor of Achilles that Patroclus wears here, it is an act of extreme hubris, since normally the armor of a slain warrior belongs to the one who slew them. Hector being only the third killer, not the most important one nor first, yet still taking the armor, dooms him to his fate. That fate is articulated by Patroclus in the prophecy he gives as he dies. This connects to the prophecy that Hector gives to Achilles when he dies, connecting both Patroclus and Hector together in their deaths. But one thing you must be wondering is, why are there 3 killers of Patroclus? Owens, in his story of the Iliad, articulates it perfectly as always, quote, "Here he, the poet, deliberately takes away from Hector the glory that would naturally redound to him as the conqueror of Patroclus. Apollo and Euphorbus are given a hand in his death. Apollo, to allow of Euphorbus taking a part without diminishing the honor of Patroclus. The glory is all his, that is Patroclus, in that it takes 2 men and a god to overcome him. Thus Patroclus has all our sympathy here, and it is not qualified by any sense of the glory of his vanquisher." End quote. The glory of this scene shifts away from Hector and towards Patroclus and swells our sympathy for him, paving the way for the white-hot rage that Achilles will feel over the death of his friend. Now there is some more to say on the tripartite killing of Patroclus, which I will save for a little later, but for now let me draw this episode to a close. Hector replies to Patroclus that perhaps Achilles will lose in their encounter, as if fate would or could perchance be on his side. He then draws his spear from Patroclus and sets off after Automedon and the famous horses of Achilles. Wow, so we have literally traveled the breadth of the land that is covered in the Iliad, from the ships of the Achaeans to the walls of Troy. And remember, it is still the same day that started in Book 11. We're now only halfway through. Seemingly not a lot happened in this book, but judging by how long this episode is, that obviously isn't the case. No, whenever Achilles and Hector figure prominently in the story, there is no lack of interesting things to discuss. Before we wrap up, there are 2 things I wanted to cover in finer detail. The first is an open-ended question. Does Achilles renounce his rage here? As in, is the wrath of Achilles, as it stands in Book 16, given up? In Book 9, when we heard from him, he said he would make the decision to leave the next morning. Well, that has come and gone, and he's still around. What does this mean? His acquiescence to Patroclus' plea seems a bit begrudging. After he recounts the injustice done to him by Agamemnon, he doesn't seem as angered by it as before, and says it was not possible that his heart be angered forever. He adds the caveat, as if to emphasize, that he said he would not end his wrath except when the fighting reached his own ships, which it has not yet. The sum of what we can read here is that it seems he begins to relinquish his rage. He pities Patroclus and the other soldiers and evidently doesn't want some of them to perish, and for this reason he relaxes his wrath a little. While researching this episode, I came across a detail that I hadn't noticed before, but has large implications for this scene in Book 16. In the article, The Word of Achilles, Ruth Skodal highlights the outcome of Book 9. Odysseus tells Agamemnon that Achilles threatens to leave the next morning, and crucially, doesn't mention that he revised his initial position from "I am leaving" to "I will decide to leave tomorrow morning." Because Odysseus does not report this faithfully, Achilles is operating under the assumption that the other Greek kings know about his final statement from the embassy. Thus, Achilles sends forth Patroclus and does not go himself because he's sticking to the word he gave to the embassy, that he would not rejoin until the fighting reached his ships, which he assumes is public knowledge. So it seems that yes, Achilles has mostly relinquished his wrath here, and despite what he said at the end of the embassy, he might be amenable to negotiations once more. This is also why Achilles says that he wishes he and Patroclus could be the only ones remaining after the sack of Troy. He wishes to be free of the complex social obligations that are pinning him down right now. Ever the complex character, that Achilles. The second thing I wanted to discuss in Book 16 is the character Euphorbus and why Patroclus has 3 slayers. Euphorbus is the son of Panthous and the brother of Polydamas the seer, the same one who saw the omen of the eagle clutching the snake in Book 12. Now, Polydamas' shrewd advice to Hector was ignored, and he was harshly threatened for his suggestion that they not assault the wall. In the article, Euphorbus, Hector, and the Death of Patroclus, William Allen argues that Euphorbus functions much like his brother Polydamas in that he questions the wisdom of Hector on the battlefield. In Book 17, Euphorbus encounters Menelaus, who is defending the naked body of Patroclus. Euphorbus asserts that he was the first of the Trojans to strike Patroclus with his spear, and thus the armor is his. Well, Euphorbus is promptly slain by Menelaus because why would such a minor Trojan deserve the armor of Achilles? It's much like Dolon in Book 10 desiring the horses of Achilles. Like, sure bud, dream big. This also highlights that Hector was not the slayer of Patroclus, nor Achilles for that matter. So when Hector dons Achilles' armor, Zeus describes the moment as ou katakosmon, meaning not proper, not in due order, or not as it should be. It is not proper for Hector to don the armor because 1, he was not the one to slay Patroclus, and 2, he did not kill Achilles either. Thus, Euphorbus is inserted into Patroclus' slaying to heighten the hubris of Hector's actions here, making his death all the more tragic. There is still some more to say about Euphorbus, though, that little rascal. As is often the case in the Iliad, characters stand in as doubles for other characters. In this scene, Patroclus is standing in for Achilles, and that is in a literal sense because he is wearing his armor and intended to deceive the Trojans. But he also stands in for Achilles in death as well. We are told later in the Iliad that Achilles' death will come about from Apollo and Paris and happen at the gates of Troy. This is intentionally very similar to Patroclus' death here, where Apollo and Euphorbus both play a role, and it happens at the gates of Troy. So that one is obvious. But Euphorbus also mirrors Hector here. Euphorbus is too minor a character to receive the armor of Achilles, and yet he contends with Menelaus for it anyways. In the same way, Euphorbus donning the armor of Achilles would be ou katakosmon, and Euphorbus pays for his hubris with a spear to the neck, the exact same wound that Achilles will deal to Hector in revenge. There are so many ways that characters mirror and replace one another in the Iliad. It results from the oral poetic nature of the poem where characters are swept along in story patterns that have been used before until everything starts to rhyme together. I love it. I was thoroughly intrigued by the importance of Euphorbus in the narrative. It hadn't occurred to me before that his inclusion is important and meant to cast a negative light on Hector's victory over Patroclus. It's very subtle. But I will leave Book 16 here for now. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and apologies again for the lapse in releases. I think you figured out the pattern by now, but the next episode will cover Book 17, which is the bloody struggle over the corpse of poor Patroclus. I'll also try and release an interstitial episode with some thoughts on oral poetic theory, and of course, my thoughts on the new Odyssey movie. As always, if you're loving the podcast and want to hear even more, please subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts, or follow me on Substack where you can find all my zany articles on the Iliad. But until then, erostai akustoi philoi.